All right, let's stir the pot a little bit because this is a good subject to talk about. It's debated every single day, and I go back and forth on it in my own self. Thinking about if I need to buy another truck but it's the subject of whether you want to buy a pre-emissions truck or buy something newer. And in this video, I'm strictly going to try to compare apples to apples in the sense that I'm going to compare, getting a pre-emissions truck with a rebuilt cat motor and then compare it to a brand new truck. So as far as the price goes and the fuel mileage. But I kind of grew up around trucks. My uncle drove trucks. He was in trucking business. My dad drove trucks off and on. And when I was little, every time they parked it, I was up in one, playing BJ McKay or something. But if you don't know what that is, you Google it, BJ McKay and his best friend Bear. Terrible show from the 70s. But those trucks back in those days were junk. And people, even the trucks, coming up there, the 80s and 90s, compared to what's around, the brand new trucks being built today, they're junk. The early 2000s, people love those trucks and they get real nostalgic about them. And compared to the trucks the brand new trucks coming off the line today, they're just not as good. And I know I will get lots of arguments about that, but talk to the people who drive them, who have driven them, and they'll tell you they have just as many problems as a truck with the DEF system on them. But it's just a personal choice. That's all it comes down to, a personal decision. And I make some comparisons. I'll show you in just a minute. And they're things that I value and that other people don't think about at all, because they want a certain thing. And there's things that, I devalue that other people value. So it comes down to a very personal decision. And it's really, at the end of the day, it's kind of splitting hairs on whether you want to go after that old truck or get a brand new one. So I'm going to make those comparisons and tell me what you think. Hit me up on the comments because I think this is going to get a lot of comments. All right, so the big one for me is the fuel. So what I did was I took basically 100,000 mile a year, which is probably overestimating a little bit for me. Well, it is overestimating a lot, but it's an average year, 2,000 miles a week. It's a doable year. And I took the figure of $3.25 per gallon, the cost of fuel. So what I did was, these old cat motors, they are terrible on fuel. If I'm put 6 miles to the gallon as an average, but that's a little overestimating. If you ask lots of people if they're carrying any weight at all, they're struggling to get that 6 miles per gallon. And 8 miles to the gallon for the brand new truck is underestimating. My truck is 6 years old and it gets better than that. So what I did was I put 6 for the old truck, 8 for the new truck, and that's being very conservative on the new truck. And what you come out with is you're spending $54,000 on fuel on the old truck and only $40,000 on the new truck. So every year you're spending almost $14,000 more just in fuel to drive that old truck. So over $1,000 a month that you're taking out of your pocket and putting in that fuel tank to drive the older truck. And that makes a huge difference. And I'll show you coming up, people think that the DEF issue is the huge difference, but it's actually the fuel. So just looking at one part of the DPF DEF issue, I wrote DEF on here, but I should have wrote DPF. The trouble with when the DPFs first came out, people were having lots of trouble with the doser valves and the filter gets clogged after a while. but we're talking about a brand new truck here. So it's something, the filter, you're not going to be touching for probably 2 years. The DPF issues are not a thing of the past, but they're a lot better than they used to be. But at any rate, the way I think about it is, even if I put a new doser valve and had somebody else do it, and that's $500 for parts and labor. And if I had that filter cleaned every single year, I'm only spending $1,700, and I'm still putting $11,839 in my pocket for that fuel savings just for driving the newer truck. Okay, the initial cost. This is where you get a lot of people saying, well, I can get the old truck for really cheap with a brand new rebuilt cat motor in it, and that new truck costs $170,000. Well, if you look up the cost of the cheaper new trucks, and I'm talking like Freightliner and Kenworth T680, they're anywhere between $150,000 and $180,000 depending on what options you have. So I just put $160,000. So it's a huge difference in the initial cost of buying the truck. But let's move on 5 years from now, assuming that you can pay that truck off in 5 years. Obviously, it'd be a lot easier to pay off the old truck, you would think, but let's look at it real close here. After 5 years, just considering the fuel cost, just the fuel cost itself, you've pretty much broke even. So in that 5 years, you paid $85,000 for the old truck, but just considering the fuel cost, your payments were just as much as that brand new truck. And after 5 years, you've got the old truck paid for, you've got the new truck paid for. But guess what? That fuel cost at, over $1,000 a month, now if you have that old truck, is still coming out of your pocket. In the new truck, you're putting that back in your pocket. And something else to consider too is that if you bought the old truck, then you've got close to a 30-year-old truck by now. If you bought the new truck, then you've just got a 5-year-old truck. So small thing to consider, but worth considering. Okay, just a couple of things to consider here, more on the DEF issue. That's the biggest issue with the difference between these trucks and what you hear people talk about. They just don't want to deal with the DEF issue. But I didn't cover, the cost of putting DEF in the tank. And, I just threw a number out there, $1,200 for a year. It's probably more than that, but it doesn't cost much more than that to fill that thing up every couple of weeks. But parts are a big issue. The further we move away from when these trucks were manufactured, the more expensive those parts are getting, and the more they are refurbished instead of brand new. So that's something to consider. And the big one, the restrictions. Already you can't go into California with an old truck. Colorado is considering doing the same thing, New York, and probably New Jersey. So who knows what other states are next, but more and more states are going to be outlawing these motors because there's a push to go to electric and get green. So just another thing to consider. Well, like I said, you're going to have your own things that you think are important to go into that. Just considering that fuel mileage, you're after the 5-year mark, you're pretty much break even. Except for the fact that if you bought the old pre-emissions truck, you're going to have a truck that's 30 years old after that 5 years, or a truck that's 5 years old with an engine that's never been rebuilt. And make no mistake, this is one of the things that everybody that you hear talk about those old trucks, that they get nostalgic about them, and they sort of bend reality when they're talking about how they're so reliable and they never break down, and you never have any trouble with them. That's not the case at all. So Let's just, like I said, just as far as the fuel goes, you're break even after the 5 year mark. Now, the biggest thing, and the reason why I'm comparing them, is that DEF system, the DPF system from 2009 up until the very recent past. Those systems were terrible. They just did not have any reliability whatsoever. So many little parts, doser valves, and every little thing on there at some time or another is going to cause a warning light, and you're going to have to take it in, and $500 here, $500 there. That has changed. These newer trucks, those DEF systems are a lot more reliable. It's not to say that you can't have trouble with them, but they're not what they used to be. So you can't really compare apples to oranges in that respect, because every single motor is different, whether it's the old cat motor or a brand new motor. You can drive that brand new truck right off the lot and you've got electronics issues. You can have that old cat motor and you can have, for some reason, it was manufactured crazy on a Thursday and water pumps don't fit right. You never know. So you have to compare it in an apples to apples sort of way, with just the fixed costs that you can compare. And that's what I've done here, because every truck is going to have its issues. They haven't invented the truck yet that you can drive for 500,000 miles and get a tune-up on it and keep going. So let's hear the comments. What's your preference? I know mine. I would love to be in that W900. I would love it. But it hurts to think about taking that $1,000 extra out of my pocket every month to put in the fuel tank. And like I said, at the end of 5 years, with the brand new truck, you have a 5-year-old truck. If you went and got that old truck, then at the end of that 5 years, it's probably close to 30 years old now. So some things to think about.